It was 2:10 a.m. when everything changed. The buffet had long closed. The crystal lights in the Ritzford Hotel dining hall dimmed to a soft, sleepy gold. And while the world upstairs slept, down here, a girl knelt by the napkin drawer, sketching dreams no one believed in, except her. She thought no one saw her. But someone did. And he was not the kind of man who usually noticed napkin girls. The Ritzford Hotel was a place of power, the kind of place where time moved slower, where shoes clicked with authority, and every whisper echoed across polished marble like it mattered. It stood proudly in the heart of Manhattan, with an entrance so grand it could have belonged to royalty. Yet tonight, the ballroom was silent, the chandeliers tired, and the banquet tables sat like quiet soldiers waiting for dawn. In a corner of the dining room down the hall near the staff pantry, Amelia Reyes adjusted her name tag for the 5th time that night. The metal clasp had long since bent out of shape, and the M in her name had faded, so most guests called her Anelia or Amy, never knowing the difference. She didn't correct them. She was invisible anyway. Amelia had been working night shifts at the Ritzford for 6 months. She folded napkins, refilled condiments, swept under chairs with gold legs, and wiped fingerprints off dessert tongs that no one ever used. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough for rent in a shared basement apartment with no windows and 2 roommates who smoked too much weed. She had learned to move quietly, to listen more than she spoke, to keep her dreams hidden. Because in a place like this, dreams didn't belong to people like her. But tonight, she was tired. And when the last tray had been cleared and the cameras in the back hall blinked off for their maintenance cycle, Amelia reached into her backpack and pulled out a wrinkled folder. Inside were sheets of recycled paper, some from hotel printers, some the backs of discarded invoices, all covered in sharp pencil lines. Blueprints. Her blueprints. Amelia didn't have a degree. She didn't even have a proper sketchbook. But she had taught herself architecture from used textbooks and free online courses, borrowed under an alias from the library across town. She stayed up late most nights, drawing, measuring, imagining. Not skyscrapers, not cathedrals, homes, small homes, warm homes, safe homes, the kind of homes people like her had never lived in. She knelt by the buffet table, pretending to restock napkins, while her fingers flew across the paper. A new idea had taken hold. A compact 2-bedroom layout with skylights that could be installed for under $400. She'd drawn and redrawn it over the past few weeks, but something about the hallway spacing still didn't sit right. She chewed her pencil and pressed her lips together, adjusting the lines. That's when she heard footsteps. She froze. Not the heavy stomp of the night porter, not the soft slide of kitchen shoes. These were measured, slow, expensive-sounding footsteps, leather soles on stone, deliberate like someone used to being heard. Amelia shoved the papers back into the folder, scrambled to her feet, and tried to look busy restocking forks. Too late. Julian Blackthorne had never been one for interruptions. At 48, he had built a real estate empire stretching from Manhattan to Dubai. He was known as the visionary of glass, the man who turned sky into currency. Every penthouse he touched sold before the paint dried. Every room he entered adjusted to his presence. But tonight, he couldn't sleep. His flight to Switzerland had been delayed. The suite upstairs felt too cold. He missed his daughter, though he would never say it. He walked down to the dining area out of restlessness, maybe for a drink, maybe for silence. What he found was a girl, not a guest, not a manager. Just a girl in a hotel uniform, kneeling behind the buffet table with a stack of papers. She didn't see him at first, but he saw her, and more importantly, he saw what was in her hands. "Excuse me," he said, voice low but clear. She jolted. I was just tidying up, sir. Sorry, I didn't mean—" He tilted his head slightly. "What were you drawing?" Amelia's stomach dropped. "I wasn't drawing anything," she lied, already feeling heat rise to her cheeks. He stepped closer, and for the first time, she noticed the details. Tailored charcoal trousers, a navy cashmere sweater with no logo but clear luxury. His silver watch caught the light, understated but priceless. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp. "May I see?" he asked, gesturing toward the folder. She hesitated. I mean, it's just something I mess around with. It's not important." His expression didn't change, but his voice softened. "It might be." That made her look up. For the first time in years, someone didn't dismiss her before she spoke. Someone didn't see just a hotel worker with a rag and a name tag that didn't even say her name right. She held out the folder with trembling fingers. He took it, opened it. Silence. Julian flipped through the sketches, floor plans, section drawings, notes in the margins about airflow and sunlight and insulation hacks using recycled materials, diagrams of roof angles and garden layouts for tiny plots of land. These weren't doodles, they were designs, real, intelligent, human. He stopped at one labeled Project Hearthlight. It was a one-story home, just 900 square feet, but the details were meticulous. Angled windows to trap winter sunlight, natural cross-ventilation, a wraparound porch built from reclaimed wood. "This," he said quietly, "is beautiful." Amelia didn't answer, because her heart was pounding too loudly. He looked up. "Where did you learn this?" "I taught myself," she whispered. "I watch lectures online. I read textbooks after work. Sometimes I go to open houses just to see how real layouts work. I memorize them." His brow furrowed slightly. "Why architecture?" She blinked. "Because when I was little, I used to move a lot. My mom and I were always running. Cracks in the ceiling, Moldavian cold floors, bad locks. Every place we lived in made us feel like we didn't belong anywhere." She took a breath. "So I started drawing places where we could have belonged." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he closed the folder, handed it back gently. "My name is Julian Blackthorne," he said, "and I run the Blackthorne Foundation." Amelia stiffened. She knew that name. Everyone in the hotel whispered about him when he stayed here. He was on magazine covers. He'd built half of Midtown. "I'd like to sponsor your education," he said simply. "If you're willing." She stared at him, stunned. "But why?" He shrugged. "'Cause I've built towers for the rich, and none of them ever made me feel the way your sketch just did." She didn't cry. Not yet. Not in front of him. But her hand tightened on the folder like it was her lifeline. He started to turn, then paused. "There's a scholarship application on our foundation site. I'll make sure someone watches for your name, but you'll have to earn it. I don't do handouts." Amelia nodded, her throat dry. "I'm not asking for one." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good." And then he walked away. That night, Amelia didn't sleep. She sat in the staff locker room, staring at her sketches with new eyes. The same drawings that had felt small, worthless, invisible, now felt like seeds. Real seeds. And someone had just handed her a patch of sunlight. She had been replacing napkins. But what he saw was a blueprint for something more. And what she felt, for the first time in years, was that maybe, just maybe, she could belong somewhere too. Just one blueprint, he said, but what she heard was, you might finally get a life where you don't have to apologize for existing. She wanted to believe it, but people like her didn't get to dream all the way through. The next morning, Amelia's hands trembled as she opened her ancient laptop at the edge of the shared kitchen counter. The screen flickered once, then buzzed to life. Her roommates were still asleep, tangled in blankets and hangovers, but she was wide awake, wearing the same uniform from last night, her sketches spread out like a makeshift altar. The Blackthorn Foundation website loaded slowly. Her heart beat faster than the Wi-Fi. It was real. Julian Blackthorn hadn't been a dream. He hadn't just glanced at her folder and moved on like every other man in a suit. He saw her, not just as a hotel worker, not even just as an aspiring architect. He saw her fire. The scholarship application was brutal, 12 pages, a personal essay, design samples, letters of recommendation, proof of financial hardship, a portfolio. She stared at the screen, shoulders slumping. Portfolio echoed like a punch. Her sketches were done on scrap paper. Her notes were handwritten. She didn't even have CAD software, just pencils, a ruler, and a good eye. But Julian hadn't asked for software. He'd asked for belief. So she scanned each drawing, labeling them carefully: Project Hearthlight, Window Light Optimization, Shared Garden Living. She wrote her essay late into the night, then rewrote it twice, then scrapped the third draft and started over. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Architecture saved me before anyone else ever did, she wrote. I may not have the tools, but I've had the hunger. Every floor plan I draw is a home I wish someone had built for my mother. I want to be the kind of architect who makes people feel like they finally belong. She pressed submit at 3:41 a.m., then sat in silence, staring at the confirmation screen as if it might disappear. It didn't. Days passed. Work dragged on, refilling sugar, folding napkins, replacing table cards. But something had shifted. Every time she passed the buffet table, she looked toward the spot where Julian had stood, as if a ghost of hope still lingered there. She wanted to tell someone. Her co-workers, her roommates, her mother, but she didn't, because something else was shifting too. The first call came 3 days later. Her little brother Lucas had been sent home from school again. Asthma. Again. The new inhaler hadn't worked. The old trailer they lived in back in New Mexico had mold in the vents again. Her mom's voice on the phone was brittle, like it might snap mid-sentence. I hate to ask, Mija, but if you could send a little more this week. Amelia looked down at her paycheck stub from the hotel, just enough for rent, groceries, and maybe a Metro card. Of course, she whispered. Don't worry about it. She sent $120, skipped dinner that night, and the next. That Friday, the email came. Subject, Scholarship Shortlist Notification. Her breath stopped. She clicked. Dear Ms. Reyes, we are pleased to inform you that your application has been shortlisted for the Blackthorn Future Builders Grant. You are invited to interview with our selection board next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Please bring printed materials and ID. Dress code, business formal. Her throat tightened. Formal? She didn't even own a pair of slacks without bleach stains. She called in a favor from a co-worker, borrowed black pants that were too tight and a blouse 2 sizes too big. Her manager gave her the day off without asking why, just handed her a breakfast voucher and said, do something good. The Blackthorn Foundation office was nothing like the Ritzford. It was quieter, warmer. Books lined the shelves, plants rested in corners, no golden lions or crystal sculptures, just light, sunlight pouring through wide windows, as if even the building believed in what it was doing. Amelia sat in the waiting area, folder in hand, feet sweating in borrowed flats. A receptionist with kind eyes smiled and said, "They're ready for you." She walked in, knees trembling. 3 people sat behind a long oak table. A woman in a navy suit, a man with wire-frame glasses, and on the far left, Julian Blackthorne. He wore the same calm as he did that night. But this time he wasn't alone. He was watching. "Ms. Reyes," the woman began, "tell us, why architecture?" Amelia opened her folder, but the words she'd rehearsed vanished. I used to move a lot," she stammered. "When I was a kid, my mom and I. We stayed in shelters, motels, never really had a place that felt like ours. So I started drawing them. Homes. Not big ones, just kind ones." The man with glasses leaned forward. "What does a kind home mean?" She looked at him, heart pounding. "A kind home is a place where the light hits the kitchen sink just right, where the roof doesn't creak in the wind, where the front door doesn't feel like a barrier, but an invitation." She swallowed. "Where your little brother doesn't wheeze because there's mold in the vents." Silence. The woman in navy nodded, slowly. Julian didn't say a word, but his eyes never left her. When she walked out, her palms were damp with sweat. The receptionist smiled again. "Most people leave crying. You're still standing. That's something." Amelia smiled back. But inside, she felt the panic rising. That night, her mom called again. Lucas had collapsed. They'd gone to the ER. The doctor said the air quality in the trailer was unsafe, but they couldn't afford to move. "We need at least $200 to cover the bill," her mom whispered. Amelia sat in her tiny apartment, staring at her empty wallet. She had $38 to her name. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She cried, not because of her brother, but because this was the moment she might have to give up everything she'd dreamed of, for everything she couldn't walk away from. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at the Ritzford, hand-delivered, sealed in silver. She opened it in the locker room. "Congratulations. You have been selected to receive the Blackthorne Future Builders Grant. Full tuition, stipend, relocation assistance, start date, fall semester." There was a note at the bottom. "One sketch lit the spark. The rest, we believe, is a future only you can build. JB." She sat there for a long time, then pulled out her phone, typed a message to her mom. "I got it, full ride, everything I dreamed of." Then deleted it, typed again. "How's Lucas feeling?" Because she didn't know if she could take the scholarship. Because she didn't know who she'd be if she let her family suffer. Because sometimes survival demands silence, even from the loudest part of your soul. But what she didn't know was that someone else had already read her pain between the lines. She got everything she ever dreamed of. But dreams, she was learning, came with price tags too. And sometimes, the ones we love are the ones we're afraid to outgrow. Julian Blackthorne sat at the corner table of his office, overlooking the Hudson River. The skyline shimmered under late morning light, but he wasn't watching it. He was staring at a single sheet of paper. It was a printed transcript of a voicemail, one he had no right to hear. But power, as Julian had learned a long time ago, had its privileges. Lucas collapsed again, the mother's voice said. Cracked, desperate. "They said the trailer's making his breathing worse. I don't know what to do. Amelia's working so hard and I don't want to tell her we're drowning again." Julian pressed his fingers together. Slowly, quietly. He didn't like invading privacy. But after Amelia's interview, something had bothered him. Something behind her eyes, like she was waiting for permission to fall apart. So he'd made one call, to a contact in Las Cruces, New Mexico. A man owed him a favor, a local housing inspector. It took less than 12 hours to get the report. Mold infestation, Unstable wiring, no ventilation, asthma triggers everywhere. A health hazard. Unlivable. The family was still inside. Julian leaned back in his chair. This girl, this quiet whirlwind who had handed him dreams, sketched on the back of inventory receipts. She was about to walk away from everything because of a leaky roof in a desert town. And she hadn't told a soul. He admired that. He hated that. Because he'd spent most of his life building cities for people who already had everything. And now here was someone who actually needed a foundation beneath her feet, and she was too proud to ask for it. Back at the Ritzford, Amelia was folding towels slower than usual. The laundry room steamed around her like a cheap sauna. Her borrowed flats pinched, her fingers ached, but it wasn't the job that wore her down. It was the question, do I go or do I stay? She had read the scholarship letter a dozen times. She kept it folded in her apron pocket like it might dissolve if left alone too long. Her mom hadn't asked. Her brother hadn't begged. But Amelia knew. She knew the cost of absence. She'd lived it once when her own father walked out. She couldn't do that to Lucas. And yet, every night since the interview, she'd dreamt of floor plans, of sitting in a real classroom, of sharpening a mechanical pencil and having it matter. She wanted this. God, she wanted this. But wanting, she'd learned, didn't mean deserving. The next day, she found a note in her locker, a small envelope, handwritten, to Miss Reyes, from J.B. Her heart thudded. Inside was a key card, Ritzford logo, nothing else. She blinked, then on the back of the envelope, barely visible. Room 704, after shift. No obligation, just a conversation. She almost threw it away. Almost. But curiosity, as it often does, outweighed caution. Room 704 was on the executive floor. The kind of floor she only cleaned with gloves and a team of 3. Now she stood alone, uniform damp with sweat, the scholarship letter still folded in her apron pocket, and a key card in her shaking hand. She knocked. Julian opened the door himself. No assistant, no valet, just him, holding 2 cups of tea. "Chamomile," he said. "Didn't think you'd want coffee this late." She stepped in slowly, unsure. The suite was elegant but not cold. Soft wood tones, a painting of a tree at dusk, a desk covered in blueprints. Not hers. His. He motioned toward the armchair. She didn't sit. "Why am I here?" Julian nodded, as if expecting the question. "Because I know you're going to say no." Amelia's face fell. "How?" "I made inquiries," he said gently. "I know about your brother, about your mother, the trailer, the hospital bills." Her eyes flashed with a mix of shame and fury. "You hacked my life?" "I saved it," he replied, calm but firm, "before you let it swallow yours." Silence. She didn't move. "I had no right," he admitted. "But I've spent a lifetime building cities that don't help people like you. Let me at least fix this much." She shook her head. "It's not that simple." "It is," he said, "if you'll let it be." He handed her a folder. Inside, a new housing arrangement, a relocation plan, a job offer for her mother, full medical coverage for Lucas. All expenses paid, no strings. Amelia stared at the papers, then looked up. "Why are you doing this?" Julian didn't blink. "Because when you showed me your sketches, you didn't just design a house. You designed a life, one you were never allowed to have. And I realized, I've never drawn anything that brave in my entire career." She sat down slowly, legs weak. "Do you think I deserve this?" she whispered. "I think you built this," he replied. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. "Not yet." "You won't owe me anything," he said. "Not gratitude, not praise. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Become the architect who makes the next girl feel seen." That night, Amelia didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from the sudden, terrifying possibility. that her life was no longer a hallway with no exits, but a room full of doors. 3 weeks later, she boarded a train with her sketch folder, a laptop bag, and Lucas's favorite drawing pinned inside the cover. A crooked house with bright windows and the words, "My sister builds homes." Her mom cried at the station. Lucas waved until the train disappeared. Amelia stared out the window, not at the past, but at the foundation of everything ahead. Julian watched her go from a distance. He didn't wave. He didn't say goodbye. But when he returned to his suite that night, he poured himself a quiet glass of scotch, looked at the wall full of blueprints, and for the first time in years, added someone else's drawing beside his own. A tiny home with morning light windows and a girl's name in the corner, a Reyes. Sometimes we design buildings, but sometimes we build something better. Someone. Some people arrive in a place and feel at home. Others arrive and carry their whole past like a backpack no one can see. Amelia Reyes was the second kind. The first day of design school felt like walking into a dream that wasn't quite hers. The walls were too white, the voices too confident, the names on the plaques. Too many syllables, too many fathers on donation boards. Amelia clutched her student ID badge as she stepped into the common studio space. There were 28 students in her cohort, all first years, all buzzing. Her ID hung from a plain black lanyard. Most others had custom leather holders, initials embossed, looped around designer tote bags. One girl even had her old high school's architecture award dangling beside it, like she was still collecting trophies just by showing up. Amelia had a backpack from Target and a granola bar, but what she carried, they couldn't see. "Okay, people, time to settle in." The professor, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a blazer too rumpled to be intentional, clapped his hands. "Welcome to Design Theory and Human Form." He scribbled something on the board in quick, looping strokes. Who deserves beauty? No one said a word. "Is beauty universal?" he asked. "Is it a right? A privilege? A function of wealth? What makes a space feel beautiful?" Amelia raised her hand. It surprised even her. "Yes," he said without even checking his roster. She cleared her throat. "When you feel safe in a space, it becomes beautiful." Some heads turned. One girl in thick-framed glasses muttered, "That's poetic." A boy near the window smirked. "So, like, prisons can be beautiful too?" Amelia's cheeks burned, but the professor nodded slowly. "That's a real answer." Then he added, "A place doesn't become sacred because of architecture. It becomes sacred because of what it holds." In the following weeks, Amelia learned to walk the halls with quiet resolve. She listened more than she spoke. She drew constantly. She stayed late after everyone left. She built models from recycled foam and cardboard from delivery boxes. And she started writing names of the people she loved in pencil beneath the foundations of her mock homes, as if she was building for them every single time. But still, there were cracks in her confidence, like the time a classmate asked casually, "Where did you go to undergrad?" She answered honestly, "I didn't." They blinked. "Oh, like a transfer?" "No, I came straight from work." That was the end of that conversation. Or when a guest lecturer visited from Berlin, and during the Q&A, someone asked if he saw a future for non-traditional voices in global design. He paused before saying, "Well, it depends how much catching up those voices are willing to do." The room chuckled. Amelia didn't. The studio critiques were the hardest. Everyone posted their models on long tables, stood beside them like parents introducing perfect children. Some were pristine. Laser-cut edges, gleaming finishes, tiny trees made of hand-twisted wire. Amelia's models were raw, uneven, but human. Her latest project, Modular Belonging, was a compact housing concept for multi-generational families. Every room had dual-purpose space. Every window faced a different direction to bring in varied natural light. She added a built-in reading nook under the stairs, a quiet corner for children. It wasn't fancy, but it was thoughtful. The feedback came like drizzle on concrete, cold, unyielding, too emotionally driven. Design feels too grounded, not aspirational. Do low-income families even prioritize aesthetics? She wanted to scream. Yes, they do. Because when the world forgets you, beauty becomes survival. But she said nothing. Just packed up her model, went home, and cried under a borrowed blanket. The next day, someone slid a note into her locker. No name. Just handwriting she recognized. Julian's. They will not understand you at first, but eventually, they'll study you. She folded the paper into her wallet, behind the only photo she had of her and Lucas on a bus stop bench. Both laughing, both covered in chocolate from a melted snack. On Friday, something shifted. The professor walked in, arms full of binders. New assignment, he said. Partnered build. Design a public shelter with dignity in mind. Heads turned. Whispers. Amelia felt it instantly. She was going to be paired with someone who didn't want her. And she was right. "Reed?" the professor called. A tall, lean guy with tortoise glasses and a permanent smirk raised his hand. "You're with Amelia." Reed's face dropped slightly. He masked it with a shrug. Cool. But she saw it. The same look she used to see in hotel guests who realized she was the one delivering their extra towels. They started the project that afternoon. Reed talked over her, constantly. He wanted steel, glass, a cantilevered walkway to symbolize rise above struggle. She suggested passive heating, warm materials, open kitchens. He sighed. "We're building a statement, not a soup kitchen." She folded her arms. "Do you even know what it feels like to need one?" Silence. Reed didn't answer, but for once he listened. By Sunday, their designs had merged, not perfectly but meaningfully. They kept the glass walkway, but underneath it, Amelia added a communal space, warm benches, a story wall, a small garden that would bloom no matter the season. They titled it The Bridge Beneath. Presentation day arrived. Students presented. Professors listened. Some nodded. Some barely looked up. When it was Amelia and Reed's turn, she stepped forward first and spoke clearly. When you build for people who are constantly pushed aside, you don't build to impress. You build to invite. Beauty is not a luxury. It's a declaration, a reminder that everyone, no matter where they sleep tonight, deserves to be treated as if they'll still be here tomorrow. The room was silent. Then the applause came. Not loud, but real. Even the professor leaned back, arms crossed, half smiling. Later that night, as she left the building, someone called after her. "Hey, Amelia, right?" She turned. It was Reed. He scratched the back of his neck. "Hey, thanks for that. You made me look smarter than I am." She smiled. "Number I made you look human." He chuckled. "Fair." Then added, "You're different, you know that?" "I know," she said. "I finally like that about me." That night, she wrote a letter to Julian. She didn't send it, but she folded it and tucked it beside his last note. "They saw me today, not all of them, but enough. I think I'm starting to believe what you saw in me. And more than that, I'm beginning to see it myself." It wasn't the lights that scared her. It was the idea that in a room full of design, the quiet kind she carried wouldn't make a sound. The invitation came printed on ivory cardstock with gold lettering and a wax seal. The Emerge Showcase, celebrating the next generation of visionary designers. It was the kind of event most first-year students didn't even dream of attending, much less presenting at. Only 5 students in the entire school had been selected to exhibit. Amelia was one of them. She stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before opening it, then read the contents 5 times before believing them. There it was. Her name, Amelia Reyes, Project Alma, modular belonging in transitional housing. The others who made the cut were predictable. Vanessa Liu, whose father owned 3 galleries and had commissioned art installations for the city. James Easton, whose summer internships spanned Milan, Tokyo, and London. Claire Belmont, who had already signed a partnership deal with a Scandinavian design firm. And then there was Amelia. She didn't have a mentor, she didn't have a legacy. She barely had money to buy new foam board, but what she had was purpose. The week before the event, Amelia worked day and night in the fabrication lab. She had no 3D printer access, so she carved every piece by hand. She sanded, glued, and painted her tiny models under flickering fluorescent lights. She skipped meals, took naps curled beside the radiator, whispered encouragement to herself between cuts. This isn't just for you. This is for every kid who ever slept on a floor and still dreamed of walls with windows. On the morning of the showcase, she ironed her best shirt, the only one she owned without a stain. She wore black slacks and borrowed flats again, hair tied back, a small pin on her lapel that said, "Build with kindness." She arrived early. The venue was a converted warehouse. Tall ceilings, exposed brick, soft spotlighting. Professionals floated in and out. Developers, architecture critics, magazine editors, donors. Champagne flutes clinked. Conversations buzzed in French, Italian, and jargon. Her station was tucked between Vanessa's glowing digital display and James's LED-simulated eco-village. Amelia's model sat under a single warm lamp. Cardboard, foam, paper, no screens, no projections. But it had something the others didn't. It felt human. She stood tall. One by one, people passed. Some smiled politely. Some nodded and walked on. One man asked if she had a patent. She said no. He nodded again, then disappeared. For a moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Then someone lingered. A woman in her 50s wearing no name tag, just a slate gray suit and soft leather shoes. Her eyes scanned the model, then the sketches beside it. She didn't ask about square footage or material cost. She asked, "What inspired the curve in the inner courtyard?" Amelia blinked. "The wind," she said, "and the way children chase it." The woman smiled faintly, then said, "That's the first poetic answer I've heard tonight that didn't feel forced." She didn't introduce herself, but later Amelia would learn she was the editor-in-chief of Form and Function magazine. Just as the room began to quiet, Julian Blackthorne entered. He wasn't on the guest list, but that never stopped him. He moved through the showcase like he was observing a city he once built. Heads turned. Whispers followed. He looked at no one directly, until he found her. Amelia stood beside her model, hands clasped, tired, hopeful, not desperate, but ready. Julian approached, said nothing at first. Then, "You didn't polish it for them." She shook her head. "They weren't the ones I built it for." He smiled. "They'll talk about this one. Maybe not tonight, but later, in quieter rooms." At the end of the night, the director stepped up with a microphone. Tonight's showcase wasn't about polish. It was about vision, about what design can mean, not just what it can sell. He paused. We're thrilled to announce that one of tonight's presentations will be funded for real-world prototyping. Amelia's chest tightened. She didn't expect to win, but something in her wanted to believe, just for a moment. The director continued. The selected project is Project Alma by Amelia Reyes. The room froze, then clapped. She didn't hear most of it. She was too busy gripping the edge of her table, whispering, "Thank you," to no one in particular. That night, Julian sent her a single message. Some models shine. Yours lit the room from underneath. The next morning, Amelia stood at a street corner, waiting for her bus to campus. The city was still waking up. Light spilled over construction cranes and traffic signs. Coffee steam curled into cold air. In her hand was a folded map, not of the city, but of a new plot of land just outside Brooklyn. It wasn't much, but it was hers to build. And she knew exactly who it would hold. Some battles don't look like arguments. They look like meetings, like voices talking over yours, like nods that say, "We'll take it from here." Amelia Reyes walked into the conference room, clutching a folder too thin for what it represented. It was 8:03 a.m., and already the room buzzed with voices louder than hers. Engineers, city reps, project managers in sharp suits, investors. The kind of people who saw numbers in places. She saw windows. This was the first planning session for Project Alma, now officially funded for prototype construction. Amelia was the lead designer, on paper. But in reality, she was still the new girl, the outsider, the one whose idea had touched hearts but now had to pass tests. The first face to greet her was a man named Colin Hart, structural engineer, early 50s, stern jawline, Ivy League resume. He didn't shake hands, just nodded once and said, "You're the dreamer, right?" She blinked. "I'm the designer." He half smiled. "Same thing." They reviewed the concept boards. Amelia had brought sketches, refined ones, showing material ideas, the modular layout, solar integration, the open kitchen principle. She'd even added community space with vertical gardens made from scrap pallets. Colin glanced at it for 6 seconds. "Looks soft." "I'm sorry?" "I mean the structure. It's very idealistic." "Idealism doesn't make a roof leak," she replied, steady. That got a laugh from someone down the table. She didn't turn to see who. The next hour was worse. Everything she loved about Alma, the curves, the shared corners, the use of sunlight, became targets. "This layout isn't cost-efficient. Have you considered prefab instead? Your angles aren't load-tested. Families won't care about windows, they want walls." Amelia's voice trembled once, then not again. "I grew up in homes like these," she said softly. "The ones you're trying to replicate. I know what people care about, and it's not just walls." A beat of silence. Colin adjusted his pen. "Let's just focus on what can actually get built." After the meeting, she sat alone in the stairwell. It was cold there, unheated, dusty, perfect. She took out her sketch pad and flipped to the page with the garden space. She'd drawn it after talking to a homeless mother outside a soup kitchen who told her, "If I had a small place to plant mint, I'd feel like I belonged somewhere." They'd just voted to cut that part. Amelia stared at the page, then closed the notebook. Not forever, but for today. Later that week, she got a call. Julian. She hadn't spoken to him in days. "You were quiet in the meeting," he said gently. "I wasn't invited to be loud." He was quiet a moment. Then, "You knew this would happen." "I did. I just didn't think it would hurt." There was silence again. Then Julian said something she never expected. "Let them bruise the outside. Just make sure they never reach the center." That night, Amelia stayed up redesigning Alma. But not to please them, to protect the heart of it. She reinforced the layout, recalculated materials, rotated light angles to reduce HVAC load. She used their language, but kept her soul. And in the margins of every page, she wrote one thing in pencil: belonging is structural. At the next meeting, Colin raised an eyebrow at the changes. "These are tighter," he admitted. "Cleaner." Amelia didn't smile. "They're smarter," she said. "And nothing you tried to erase is gone. I just hit it better." Someone at the table chuckled. Colin almost did. By the end of the month, they had a working plan. Alma was going to be built, a test unit just outside Brooklyn. Small, but real. Amelia visited the site every day. She watched concrete pour like memory, watched frames rise like backbone, watched light spill through angles she'd once drawn in the back of a napkin drawer at 2 a.m. One afternoon, a construction worker approached her. "You the one who drew this?" She nodded. He smiled, thumbed toward the rising beams. "My wife's on a waiting list for housing. She saw your design on the flyer, said it looks like a place where dignity might live." Amelia's throat closed. "Tell her, I built it with her in mind." That night, back in her apartment, Amelia wrote another letter. Not to Julian, to herself. They questioned the shape, the size, the softness, but not the soul, because I never gave it to them. I only shared it with the ones who would live inside. She folded the letter, slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat, and smiled, because maybe, just maybe, she was finally building from the inside out. Some moments aren't loud. They're just right. The first time Amelia saw someone unlock the door to Alma, she realized this wasn't just a building. It was a promise kept. The morning was overcast, clouds hanging low like a secret the sky hadn't decided whether to keep or reveal. The wind carried the scent of wet concrete and autumn leaves. Brooklyn buzzed in the distance, but on this quiet block, something far more rare was happening. A house was becoming a home. Amelia Reyes stood beside the small walkway leading to the very first completed Project Alma prototype. 900 square feet, 3 rooms, 1 wide-open living space, a kitchen flooded with east-facing light, a narrow garden strip with mint already beginning to sprout, and a small wooden sign on the porch that read, "Built with belonging." It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in less than 20 minutes, a family would walk through its door for the first time. The event wasn't glamorous, no red ribbon, no gold scissors, just a few chairs, a folded card table with coffee and cookies, and a small crowd of about 40 people, city reps, community leaders, volunteers, a couple from the press. Julian Blackthorne was there, of course, standing at the edge of it all, hands in his pockets, saying nothing, but watching everything. Amelia wasn't wearing a blazer or heels, just clean jeans, a soft gray sweater, and her old boots, the same ones she wore when she'd pored over blueprints under the buffet table. She didn't prepare a speech. She had one written, but it didn't feel like today needed words that came from paper. It needed something else. At exactly 10:01 a.m., the family arrived. A woman in her early 30s, Elena, her son, Marco, 9 years old, quiet eyes, clutched a sketchbook, and her mother, Rosa, short, elegant, and walking slowly with a cane. Elena's hands trembled as she approached. She looked at Amelia as if to say, "Are you sure this is for us?" Amelia nodded. "It's yours." The boy stared at the house with wonder. "There's a tree," he whispered. Elena smiled through tears. "I never thought I'd see my name on a mailbox." A quiet applause rose as Elena took the key from the project coordinator. It was small, silver, attached to a tag that read simply, Unit 001, Alma, welcome home. She opened the door. It didn't creak. It didn't stick. It didn't sigh like an old trailer or shelter door. It opened clean, like a breath. They stepped inside. The crowd stayed outside, respectful. But a few windows were open, and from where Amelia stood, she could hear something soft. Not a speech, not a scream. Just a quiet exhale, like someone finally set down a weight they'd carried too long. Julian stepped beside her. Neither said anything for a while. Then he murmured, "You didn't design this to impress them, did you?" She shook her head. "I designed it so no one would ever feel like they had to apologize for walking through the door." He nodded, then added, 100 people will walk past this house today, but the one who walks into it, you built the world for them. Some moments aren't loud, they're just right. The first time Amelia saw someone unlock the door to Alma, she realized this wasn't just a building. It was a promise kept. The morning was overcast, clouds hanging low like a secret the sky hadn't decided whether to keep or reveal. The wind carried the scent of wet concrete and autumn leaves. Brooklyn buzzed in the distance, but on this quiet block, something far more rare was happening. A house was becoming a home. Amelia Reyes stood beside the small walkway leading to the very first completed Project Alma prototype. 900 square feet, 3 rooms, 1 wide-open living space, a kitchen flooded with east-facing light, a narrow garden strip with mint already beginning to sprout, and a small wooden sign on the porch that read, "Built with belonging." It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and in less than 20 minutes, a family would walk through its door for the first time. The event wasn't glamorous. No red ribbon, no gold scissors, just a few chairs, a folded card table with coffee and cookies, and a small crowd of about 40 people, city reps, community leaders, volunteers, a couple from the press. Julian Blackthorne was there, of course, standing at the edge of it all, hands in his pockets, saying nothing, but watching everything. Amelia wasn't wearing a blazer or heels, just clean jeans, a soft gray sweater, and her old boots, the same ones she wore when she'd pored over blueprints under the buffet table. She didn't prepare a speech. She had one written, but it didn't feel like today needed words that came from paper. It needed something else. At exactly 10:01 a.m., the family arrived. A woman in her early 30s, Elena. Her son, Marco, 9 years old, quiet eyes, clutched a sketchbook, and her mother, Rosa, short, elegant, and walking slowly with a cane. Elena's hands trembled as she approached. She looked at Amelia as if to say, "Are you sure this is for us?" Amelia nodded. "It's yours." The boy stared at the house with wonder. "There's a tree," he whispered. Elena smiled through tears. "I never thought I'd see my name on a mailbox." A quiet applause rose as Elena took the key from the project coordinator. It was small, silver, attached to a tag that read simply, Unit 001, Alma, welcome home. She opened the door. It didn't creak, it didn't stick, it didn't sigh like an old trailer or shelter door. It opened clean, like a breath. They stepped inside. The crowd stayed outside, respectful. But a few windows were open, and from where Amelia stood, she could hear something soft. Not a speech, not a scream, just a quiet exhale, like someone finally set down a weight they'd carried too long. Julian stepped beside her. Neither said anything for a while. Then he murmured, "You didn't design this to impress them, did you?" She shook her head. "I designed it so no one would ever feel like they had to apologize for walking through the door." He nodded, then added, 100 people will walk past this house today. But the one who walks into it, you built the world for them." Later, after the crowd thinned and the press left, Amelia lingered by the garden. Marco came outside with his sketchbook. He hesitated before speaking. "Your house. It has shadows in the right places." Amelia smiled. "What do you mean?" He flipped open his sketchbook. Inside was a drawing of Alma, charcoal and pencil, but not just the structure. He had drawn light, slanting in just right. Shadows under the windows, soft corners, a room with a circle of sun. "It feels safe," he whispered, "even on paper." She looked at him for a moment, then said, "Do you like to draw houses?" He shrugged. "I just draw where I want to sleep next." Amelia knelt beside him. "Then keep drawing," she said. "One day, someone might walk into something you imagined." Marco looked up, eyes wide. "Like you did?" She nodded. "Exactly like that." That night, Amelia returned to her apartment. It was still small, still noisy, still temporary. But when she walked in, something was different. She didn't feel like she was chasing her dream anymore. She was living inside it. She opened her laptop, began typing, a letter, to no one in particular. Or maybe to anyone who ever folded napkins at 2 a.m. and wondered if anyone would ever see them. Today, I watched a family walk into a place I once only carried in my mind, and for the first time I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't wonder if I was good enough. I just believed. Because somewhere between the blueprint and the breath, this stopped being about design. It became about worth. And I think I'm beginning to see mine. She hit save, closed the screen, and smiled. Because in some quiet corner of Brooklyn, under soft porch light and a blooming mint plant, a door was finally closed without fear. And that was the most beautiful design she'd ever drawn. Not every test comes wrapped in failure. Some arrive dressed in praise. That's the dangerous kind. 1 week after the Alma opening, Amelia received a call. The number was unfamiliar. The voice was polished. "Miss Reyes, this is Nathan Sorrell, Executive Development Director at Stratford Urban Holdings. We've been following your work, particularly Alma. We'd love to schedule a meeting." She said yes, not because she trusted him, but because she knew this moment would come. Success, after all, has a scent, and once the world gets a whiff, it shows up with smiles that aren't always soft. The office was glass and steel, perched on the 42nd floor overlooking the East River. Amelia walked in wearing her one nice blazer. She kept her hands folded in her lap during the elevator ride. She didn't rehearse anything. Just reminded herself, you don't need their permission anymore. She was ushered into a sunlit room with white walls and a long, sleek table. At the end, a man in his 40s stood to greet her. Nathan Sorrell, perfectly tailored, perfectly charming. "We've been waiting for someone like you," he said. He clicked a remote. Behind him, a screen came to life, showcasing her design, not Alma exactly, but a shinier version. Glossy finish, less wood, more glass. The open garden stripped, a second story added, private patios, chrome handles, no shared courtyard. It looked expensive, cold, unrecognizable. "This," he said, "is Alma reimagined." Amelia's mouth went dry. She said nothing. Nathan smiled as if they were already partners. "Our firm is prepared to fund mass production, 40 units across 3 pilot cities. We believe Alma has commercial viability beyond the nonprofit model. He gestured toward a thick folder. You'd be listed as lead designer, full credit. We just refine. Refine? She asked. He leaned forward, still smiling. Make it scalable, appealing to broader markets. Practical. That word again. Practical. The one they use when they didn't want to say, less human. Amelia flipped through the proposal. Terms were generous, a six-figure advance, speaking opportunities, international exhibitions, and the promise of a design team who would handle the heavy lifting. She looked up. Why me? Because you understand emotion, he said. People respond to your story. That's powerful. She nodded slowly, then asked, what about the people Alma was actually for? Nathan blinked. What do you mean? The ones who can't afford patios. He hesitated. They'll benefit eventually, once the brand grows. Amelia stared at him. Once the brand grows, so will the gap. That night, she met Julian at a quiet cafe on 14th Street. They hadn't spoken in person since the opening. He listened carefully as she told him everything, then simply asked, Do you want it? I want the reach, she said. But I don't want to gut the reason I built it. Julian sipped his coffee. Then you already have your answer. She exhaled. I just never imagined that success would hurt. It only hurts, he said gently, when it comes with a price tag on your soul. Amelia didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling, imagining the first Alma unit. Marco drawing by the light of the kitchen window. Elena finally exhaling. The curve of that space had taken her months to perfect. Now they wanted to replace it with a patio door. She opened her laptop and pulled up her original sketch file. She stared at the lines, then at the commercial render from Stratford's pitch, then back again. One was a blueprint, the other, a product. The next morning, she returned to the glass tower. Nathan welcomed her like a co-founder. Good to see you again, Miss Reyes. Ready to change the world? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I am. He handed her a pen. This is where the magic starts. Amelia looked at the paper, paused, then said, Nathan, I didn't build Alma to be reimagined. I built it to be remembered. He chuckled nervously. Sorry? She set the pen down. If you want something shiny, hire a stylist. If you want something that breathes, you have to let it feel. Nathan's smile faded. Amelia, we're offering you a chance to scale globally. She nodded. Then scale with me, not around me. Silence. She added, I'm not saying no, I'm saying not like this. 3 weeks later, Amelia launched Alma Studio, a design cooperative focused on human-centered, dignity-first architecture. She did it quietly. No press release, no dramatic headlines. Just a mission page that read, We don't build to impress, we build to remember what people need when they think no one is watching. Stratford pulled their offer. She lost half a year's worth of stability, but she kept her design. And that was priceless. That same month, Amelia got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, low-res, a woman sitting on the floor of a small living room, a pot of mint in her lap, sunlight pouring through an open window. A sticky note was taped to the back. Thank you. My son calls this our forever place. No signature, but she didn't need one. She folded the photo, pinned it beside her desk, and whispered, This is why we build. She once needed someone to believe in her. Now, someone was standing in the exact spot she once stood and asking the same silent question. Am I enough? 6 months after declining Stratford's offer, Amelia Reyes stood in a small studio space in Queens, surrounded by 7 young people, all staring at her like she might have the answers to questions they hadn't yet found the courage to ask out loud. Welcome to Alma's studio, version 1.0. It wasn't fancy. The lights buzzed, the walls were bare, and the only coffee came from a second-hand percolator. But the air was electric, charged with ideas, hope, and the quiet courage of people who had all been told no at least once in their lives. Amelia had personally invited each of them. Malik, a soft-spoken boy who used to draw cities during detention in high school. B, a single mom who had learned to sketch floor plans while her toddler napped beside her. Ravi, who dropped out of an elite architecture program after being told he was too community-minded in his vision. And others, all different, all brilliant in ways the world didn't immediately recognize. They weren't here for credentials. They were here because Amelia saw herself in them, and because they saw a chance to build something that mattered. She had started the first day of orientation with no speech, just a question. What does dignity look like in a floor plan? The room had fallen quiet, not because they didn't know, but because no one had ever asked. Amelia no longer designed alone. Instead, she wandered between desks, pausing to look at sketches, not correcting, just asking things like, who lives in this corner? What happens at 7 p.m. in this room? Where does the grandmother sit? It wasn't about angles. It was about belonging. One Thursday afternoon, Malik stayed after class. He fidgeted near the supply shelf, holding a half-finished rendering. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think I messed this up." She looked at it. It was messy, but it breathed. She sat beside him. "Tell me the story." He blinked. "What story?" "The one behind this hallway." He looked down. "It's based on my aunt's apartment. There's a window that faces this ugly wall, but every afternoon the light hits it just right, and it glows, like magic." Amelia smiled. "You didn't mess it up," she said softly. "You remembered." He looked at her, eyes glassy. And in that moment she realized she had become what Julian once was for her, a mirror, a light, a place where someone invisible felt seen. Speaking of Julian, he still sent letters, never long, never frequent, but always on time. One arrived that week, typed on thick paper. The fact that you're no longer asking where you belong tells me you've begun helping others find their place. Amelia smiled as she read it. She placed it beside the very first letter he ever sent her, the one that simply said, "We believe." Now she did too. Alma Studio's first project as a team was a renovation of an old shelter in East Harlem. It was run down, drafty, forgotten. But the foundation was good. They worked on it for weeks, drawing, debating, revising. Not just to fix the building, but to restore its soul. B suggested turning the basement into a literacy center. Ravi added rooftop planters. Malik created an entry hallway with light wells shaped like arches. Each element wasn't just design, it was memory. Repurposed, reclaimed, redeemed. Opening day came in early spring. Amelia stood near the entrance, hands in her pockets, watching families trickle in. No reporters, no speeches, just laughter. Children's hands on new walls, the smell of fresh paint and possibility. One little girl stopped by a bench her team had built. She looked up at Amelia and asked, "Did you make this?" Amelia crouched. "With help." The girl touched the bench. "It doesn't make my legs swing." "That's okay," Amelia smiled. "It'll grow with you." The girl nodded seriously, then ran off. That evening, after the last tool was put away, the studio team gathered around folding chairs, passing around cups of cheap soda and paper plates of empanadas. They didn't talk about architecture. They talked about their moms, their first homes, their worst landlords, what color walls felt safest, what windows made them feel seen. At one point, Malik stood and raised his cup. "To Amelia," he said, "for giving us a space where our stories matter." She shook her head, smiling. "No," she said, lifting her cup. "To the stories themselves, for refusing to stay hidden, and for becoming blueprints when no one was watching." That night, Amelia walked home alone through streets she once passed with earbuds in and her head down. Now she noticed light fixtures, cracked stairs, window angles. She noticed lives. And she thought, maybe architecture was never just about building. Maybe it was, about finally being able to say, "I'm here, I stayed, and I helped someone else do the same." You never really know what you're building, not fully, until one day someone writes back and says, "I'm still here because of what you drew." It was raining the morning Amelia received the letter. Not the soft, poetic kind of rain, but the steady gray curtain that made cities feel like they were holding their breath. She had just finished a site visit on the Lower East Side. Another Alma-inspired housing unit was halfway complete. She was soaked to the knees, holding blueprints in one hand and her phone in the other, when Maria, the studio's new intern, ran out with a bright yellow envelope. "No return address," she said, curious. Amelia took it with a quiet thanks. She didn't open it right away. She waited until she got back to her desk, the same one she once sketched at alone, back when Alma's studio was just an idea scribbled on the back of a receipt. She peeled the envelope open. Inside, a folded piece of lined notebook paper and a photograph. The photo showed a boy, older now, standing on the porch of Unit 001, smiling wide, holding up a tiny sign that read, "First in my family to go to college. Alma equals forever home." Beneath the photo, just 4 words in messy, familiar handwriting. "I kept the light on. Marco." Amelia pressed her hand to her chest. Marco. The boy who once whispered, "Your house has shadows in the right places." The boy who sat in her first Alma garden and called it magic. The boy who now stood taller, because something she once dared to draw gave him space to dream. She closed her eyes and let the moment hold her. It held tight. Later that day, she stood before a room full of strangers, architects, investors, and global housing advocates, at the International Human-Centered Design Summit in Copenhagen. She was the keynote speaker. Behind her, a screen displayed sleek renderings and data charts. But she didn't begin with numbers. She began with Marco. She held up the photo. "This," she said, voice steady, "is my favorite blueprint." They waited. She continued. "I used to draw when no one was looking. Then someone saw me. Then someone moved into something I once imagined. And now, years later, someone writes back. That's what we're doing. We're not designing buildings. We're planting letters into walls and praying they grow into futures someone else can live inside." Silence. Then, a standing ovation. Amelia didn't stay for the after-party. She never liked spotlights that lasted longer than the truth behind them. She went back to her hotel, made tea, sat by the window with the city lights outside, and reread Marco's note again. "I kept the light on." It echoed, in the stillness, in her ribs, in every part of her that once believed no one would ever remember the girl who folded napkins behind a buffet table at 2 a.m. and dared to draw a window. That night she opened her old sketch folder. the one with smudges and folded corners. The original Alma plans were still there. On the last page, blank for years, she began to draw. But this time, it wasn't a house. It was a wall. A long, high wall, but not the kind that keeps people out. This wall was made of letters, taped, pinned, scribbled. Letters from future residents, from students, from volunteers, from people who never met her, but lived in something she once only believed into existence, and in the center of that wall, she drew a small brass plate. It read, "Invisible until built." A week later, back in New York, she and the Alma team were setting the final bricks on a new project, a community design hub built in collaboration with 3 local high schools. As she walked the outer hallway, something caught her eye. A student, maybe 16, was staring at the freshly painted wall with awe. Amelia stepped beside her. "First time visiting?" The girl nodded. "I want to be an architect, but no one in my family's ever even owned a house." Amelia smiled. "Neither did I, but that never stopped me from drawing one." The girl looked at her, eyes wide. "You're her, right?" Amelia tilted her head. "Her?" "The napkin girl." Amelia laughed softly. "I guess so." The girl pointed to the mural they were about to unveil. A long wall covered in handwritten messages. Some real, some imagined, all born from stories like Marco's. "What's this called?" the girl asked. Amelia replied simply, "This is the wall without blueprints." It wasn't designed. It was remembered. That night, as twilight curled over the city, Amelia passed by Unit 001 again. The porch light was on. Mint still grew in the little garden, and a new name, scratched in careful handwriting, had been added beside the door. Marco Reyes, class of 2030. She didn't knock, just stood a moment longer, then walked away, smiling. Because some buildings, you don't need to enter to know they're home.